So I think to some extent I was probably a typical NET patient case in the sense that I had pancreatic. I don't know the stats, but I suspect that that's the most common. It started, I went jaundice, and that led to a series of very fast tests within 24 hours. And literally 24 hours later, we were told by the surgeon that it was incurable and that it was pancreatic cancer and that I had 3 months to live, 6 months if I had chemo. But we pretty much went straight home and after the shock and, got our wills together, planned the funeral and figured how life would carry on without me. So it was a pretty traumatic start. In hindsight, it was very detrimental to the kids, really, I think. I don't know how they work their diagnoses, but if there was a hint that it was neuroendocrine, I think probably a little more of that from the first surgeon wouldn't have given us false hope, because we're pretty realistic, but it would have avoided the crush that the kids took. Yeah, but it was 2 weeks, and then we did get confirmed it was neuroendocrine in that 2 or 3 weeks, and that did change everything. So, they didn't give me an exact prognosis at that time, but sort of we knew it was probably more in the order of 5-ish years, which seemed like I just won the lottery at that point in time. So they initially, they definitely said I was incurable. So it was really just a prolonging. And Dean, my oncologist, said, look, we'll try this chemotherapy. We'll do that first. He'd got a great peer review from around the country, including Ben Lawrence. And so we'll try this chemo, and if it works, that's great. Probably only got about a 30% chance of it working, but it's worth a crack. And if it doesn't work, then we'll go to Melbourne and look at the PERT treatment, which we'd been told about. So I think it was probably about 3 or 4 months before we had our first post-chemo scan. And my chemo was pretty standard. So they call it CAPE-TEM, so capecitabine and temozolomide. And in addition to that, I had monthly octreotide injections, which at the time, I didn't really know too much about any of that. And my wife was probably more hungry for information, and I wasn't. So I tended to put my faith in the oncologists and the docs. And I personally didn't do a huge amount of reading, actually not throughout my entire journey, but there was definitely times that I did, and I can come back to some of that with the Unicorn Foundation and Cancer Society. I think do excellent information dissemination. So we started down the octreotide CAPE-TEM, and that was probably about 4 months before the first post scan, and miraculously it showed a hint of reduction. And that was even though I'd been graded, my tumour was grade 1 according to the biopsies, but the GAT8 scans and the other scans indicated that was probably grade 2. So that's what we were thinking about. And so when it reduced, it probably confirmed it was grade 2, and that, I was one of the lucky ones, really. And so we continued down that path for 10 months. So meeting with the oncologist every month, and probably at about month 7, I think it was, the surgeon said, look, it is continuing to shrink. There may be an outside possibility that we could operate. And so we carried on, still with low expectations, but with high hopes. And at the 10-month mark, he did say, look, I think we can give this operation a go, come and see me. It was around 6.5 to 7 centimetres in diameter, the tumour. And these things that I came to learn aren't like cricket balls, they're sort of like clouds. And so what does that mean? I'm not sure, but it was pretty big. And it was through pretty much most of my pancreas into some lymph nodes and wrapped around that liver artery into the liver. So it was sizable, and it came down to, I think, roughly around 3.5 centimetres. So something like that, maybe 4 centimetres. So it had shrunk quite a lot. He took the CT scans that I was getting and pushed those into 3D and uploaded those to the virtual reality goggles. And with some peer review from Sydney and Auckland, and initially actually from Stamford, he thought he could have a go at the operation. So as my understanding was, it was all parts of the operation had been done in Christchurch Hospital, but never together. And so it was in the heroic surgery end, and I think he gave about a 90% chance of success to do the operation, but he did say there was probably a 15% chance that we'd have to abort. And I don't want anyone to quote those statistics, because he would always qualify those with, it's just a bit of a finger in the air type scenario, but that was sort of the odds. And so we had to go away and think about whether we were happy to accept those odds. So we did. To me, that was a no-brainer. I knew I was going to die, and by that stage, the prognosis he gave, because we did push him at that point, and he gave between 3 to 5 years, the oncologist did, because we needed to know. And so for me, it was a no-brainer. I'm involved in business, and if I had a 90% chance of a business success, I'd be taking it, when I knew that the odds of my business failing in 3 to 5 years was a given. To me, it was a no-brainer. So we went ahead with the surgery. It was remarkable surgery. So there was a vascular surgeon involved as well. And I think at one point there was 20 people in the operating theatre, probably some viewing, but many helping. It was 11 hours. They did some incredible initial radiology work to decrease the partial pressure around some of my around some of the arteries around the tumour, which had encapsulated the liver into the artery. And so, there's pretty high risk stuff. And so the vascular surgeon took out my jugular vein, took out a vein in my leg, and used that for a bit of plumbing after the partial pressure had been reduced. And then they took out the tumour. And at that time, before the surgery, I didn't really want to know too many of the details, because it just felt like it was such high risk. But when I asked afterwards, it just seemed absolutely remarkable what they did. So it was a Whipple's plus, I always called it, procedure. So along with that work out went half my stomach. I always said it was the vegetarian half and not the bacon and eggs half. So half my stomach went, my spleen, and obviously the whole pancreas. And then I had 2 weeks in hospital. It was in recovery. It was brutal. That was the part that I didn't get enough advice about and didn't mentally prepare well enough. It was really, really tough. And after 2 weeks, came home and just started the rehab program. But the biggest difficulty at that point was tolerating food, any sort of food. Even though I was on a nasal gastric feeding pump, any food was very difficult. And so, came home, started the rehab process, and it's been 10 months now. The first 3 to 4 months, I couldn't tolerate food to the point that I lost 16 kilograms of weight, and it got dire really. And I had nasal gastric put back in, and that came out through an unfortunate incident on the side of the road with a bit of vomiting. And so they looked to put in a gastric feeding pump into the stomach. And that didn't work because my stomach had moved up under my rib cage. So eventually they did a feeding tube into my intestine, and so I had that feeding pump on for 6 months, till eventually I was able to take it off sort of during the day, and then eventually completely off. And then I started to try and eat on my own. So it was only a couple of months to go actually, and I achieved my ultimate goal I set for myself in hospital when I couldn't walk or couldn't move 10 months ago was to ski from the top of the mountain again. So I achieved that 3 weeks ago. So they took out, they said they got the whole tumour. They took out 36 lymph nodes, I think, from memory, and it had encroached into, I think, 5 or 6. So that was the bad news. But they got the tumour out from the artery into the liver, and they said there were pretty good margins. But we know that there's a risk that they didn't get it all, and that it could come back. And to one of your questions around prognosis, yeah, I was keen to know. I felt I needed to know whether I had, a few years. The odds would say I'd have a few years post-surgery, or 10 years, or whatever. So I did ask for that. And what was really cool was Saxon Connell, the surgeon, went away and looked at the research to find out the odds of, or probabilities of, based on my situation, whether I would have another 5 years, 10 years, and so on. And so he actually, I think, did some regression analysis or some statistical analysis in addition to the research papers. And in the end, he said he gave us more than a 50% chance that I would have another 5 years. He said he'd love to have been more accurate, but that's the only indicator he could give. But yeah, I think it'll be higher than that. It's been a long journey, but I'm very fortunate. I think based on what the odds that the docs gave me along the way, I think I've 1.5% chance from the initial diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. So I say I'm the luckiest unlucky person in the world